All right, welcome to the second installment of Learning Schools, Thriving Through the Pandemic. I'm Joe Stremka, and I'm here talking to Dr. Kelly Grogan. Dr. Kelly Grogan is formerly the head of innovation and staff learning at the Chinese International School of Hong Kong, though she's transitioning to a school in San Francisco, and will continue to serve as an ISTE trainer at 21C. So, Dr. Kelly Grogan, welcome.
Thank you, Joseph. It's really good to be here and to have this conversation. And it's great just to touch base with you again after meeting you for the first time last spring. So I think it's been about a year.
Yeah, that's right. We met, I was one of your students at 21C's first international ISTE cohort. And it took me a little while, but I eventually got there and crossed the finish line. Well, crossed the first finish line, but I'm continuing to learn, how to integrate those ISTE standards into my professional practice. So thanks. It was great meeting you there, and I'm glad we've been able to stay in touch. Yeah.
It's been great.
So today we're talking about learning schools thriving through the pandemic, with the idea that if we know what these schools that were able to adapt and pivot in the face of one of the largest global event that many of us have lived through, then maybe we can create schools that are more adaptive and resilient that our children and our communities need and deserve. So you were at the Chinese International School of Hong Kong. Can you describe a little bit about that school, the community it serves, and what your role was there?
The Chinese International School is a reception through year 13 school, and it has about 1,600 students across both divisions of the campus. It's an IB school for secondary, and it's a dual language school for primary. So in primary, we have 2 teachers in every classroom, a Chinese teacher and an English teacher. I will say as a side note, this became very helpful with online learning for student-teacher ratios. Mm-hmm. As a school, we have a focus on well-being. So we were one of the first schools to adopt positive psychology, and we're engaging in a new partnership with Professor Lee Waters for visible well-being. And I would say, in addition to well-being, STEAM and entrepreneurship are 2 other aspects that have been a huge part of the culture of learning at the school.
Yeah, I mean, Chinese International School is certainly, full of lighthouse practices for folks in the region to learn from. Positive psychology, STEAM, entrepreneurship, dual language programs. It's a fantastic place. So it's a great place to work, but yet I still imagine that the pandemic was a really emotional experience, difficult experience for you personally, professionally. What has this been like you, and how did the school help support those the emotional aspect of this difficult time?
The school, it's definitely it wasn't an easy year for schools, for families, just for humankind across the world. And what the number one thing that stood out for me at Chinese International School was their gracious and kind responses in supporting parents, students, and teachers. And given that there was a global pandemic happening, it still doesn't preclude other issues from arising in families, whether it's with our parents or whether it's with our teachers. And I found that the school did not let the pressure of the current crisis from stopping them from being compassionate. so allowances were made for students when we started back up at school on campus. We were always in school, but when we started back on campus, allowances were made for students to Zoom in that were still not in the country or who were just not comfortable coming back onto campus. The school leadership team also worked with faculty across the school for those who were needed to provide additional support for their own kids or for their aging parents. And whether that looked like you can have an extended time to teach online from abroad, there was a lot of, I think, professional trust that was shown to the faculty during this time. And that, I think, went a long way in terms of really feeling like the school was a true community. And it's interesting, like, although we were online basically for all of February, March, April, and half of May, the school felt more like a community and connected than any other time before. And I think that was just because of the personal relationships that were built between parents, students, teachers, even our support staff.
Yeah, that sounds, it's interesting to hear, you said the learning kept going, but all the other things you talked about, right? Compassion, community, trust, right? There are all these sort of, I guess maybe softer aspects of organizational life that were there to support people. And like you said, to feel even more like a community than before you had to leave campus. So that sounds it was difficult, but that you had a really supportive workplace to allow the learning to keep going. But
Absolutely.
I want to back up though, and you mentioned that students and teachers had returned to campus, and I suppose now are on summer vacation or near summer vacation. I want to back up to what the school's initial response was to the pandemic. Walk us through, because it's a little bit different over in Hong Kong and in mainland China.
It is. So it definitely, as part of the leadership team, let me back up. I remember having before the Chinese New Year, we were having our Chinese New Year assemblies. Many of us were leaving on holiday, some were staying in town. And at that point, there was no concern about not being back on campus. And then about a week into our Chinese New Year, the email started going back and forth amongst our team. And luckily, the day after Chinese New Year is always typically a professional development day. So we had a day to come back to school online, to readjust to face-to-face on-campus learning, and for teams to get together and put together what online learning is going to look like. I will say that the approaches between primary and secondary were contextualized for each division. So our secondary school kept their schedule. The students met with their teachers as their schedule was originally tailored for them. But in primary school, we really had to make rapid shifts based on feedback that we were getting from teachers and from parents as well as students. It's not easy to think, well, what does a reception child do online? And you cannot keep a reception child online for 6 hours a day. And when you think about a school day especially for elementary school kids, there's a lot of transition time. You're not going to keep kids in a class for 45 minutes lecturing them. And so teams really needed to, especially in the primary school, really needed to divide and conquer with how they were going to support online learning. So immediately, the school was very good about keeping their communications very clear. We already had systems of communications and that were sent out by primary leadership team, head of school, year levels, department chairs. We kept those lines of communication the same. So an example of that would be we didn't shift to creating new blogs or teacher blogs or sharing communications via Seesaw or a Google Classroom. We kept it traditionally as done through an email. And simple things like that, I think, are appreciated and were appreciated because you need to know what systems there are, and everybody needs to have within the organization, we need to be operating on the same systems to create clarity and transparency in the work that we're doing. If a parent has 4 different children, they can't deal with 4 different communication systems. So I would say number 1 was keeping really clear communications was helpful. Number 2, the school immediately put into support the tech support that was needed to help transition teachers as well as families onto online learning. That was incredible to be able to shift that many teachers into a different space within 24 hours. I think also there was a lot of autonomy given to departments and year levels to determine, given our scope and sequence of our curriculum, what learning is absolutely going to matter in this time and place right now. And that question, the answer to that question changed throughout the duration of online learning. I think the answers got better over time.
Okay. Yeah, and so you did have a little bit of practice with having the school having to respond to interruptions in learning before. That's right?
That's correct. So in November, the schools in Hong Kong had disruptions to on-campus learning during the Hong Kong protests. Actually, it went before then. During the MIT STEAM summer camp at CIS, we had disruptions to our on-campus camp due to the protests, but that was minimal, and we were able to pivot very quickly, and it happened for a day. In November, what we originally thought would be a day away from school turned out to be a week away from school, a little bit over a week, I believe. And so we did have a trial run, and I would say that most people I've talked to in Hong Kong, including us, we changed how we initially approached online learning in November to February. We learned that students needed face-to-face time with their teachers online, and it could not be completely asynchronous. So we shifted from being completely asynchronous to being, I would say, to operating in a hybrid or blended model in which students had face-to-face time and they were learning on their own at home.
So you learned from that. You didn't just get through that week of those protests. You learned from it, and you took that into this what turned out to be much longer than a week. Right? We didn't know how long it would be, and yeah. Sorry.
I know. I was just going to say, and I think that's a really good point to make. Is that similar to that time at the Hong Kong protests where we thought it would be a day, and then it was 2 days, and then 3 days. During COVID, we thought we'll be back in school in 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and then a month. And the governments would give a return date. And so there was a lot of, I think the community had to respond to a lot of pressure and anxiety of that return date to school would pass, and there was built up, we're going to return to school, and then a huge letdown especially for our students who really wanted to be on campus.
Yeah, I'm sure that that anticipation of being able to reunite with your tribe, with your community, and then having that shift be difficult, for no doubt, for everyone.
Exactly, exactly.
um, so, you talked about this a little bit earlier about how the school reorganized itself to deliver its remote learning. How did that change as that I guess school, 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, as that uncertainty continued? Were there other things that Chinese International School did to reorganize itself to continue to deliver remote learning?
I think when we're looking at remote learning, we have to look at one is the curriculum. So what are we going to teach? Two is the technology that's needed to allow for the absolute most seamless type of interaction for students at home, but also between students and teachers. Three is also the well-being of the community. A fourth component that needed to be considered and we needed to organize was our sort of child welfare and safety. So there was, if I had done anything over again, I think after the Hong Kong protests, we went right into preparing for our Christmas holiday and Christmas concerts. And I think I would have taken a week with a diverse group at the school and put out, composed an online learning crisis intervention plan that would address those four areas: our child safeguarding, our curriculum, the technology, and also our pedagogy. So just because we're online learning doesn't mean we stop talking about how students learn best and how we assess student learning. So I would say that we were very fortunate, and this is true of a lot of our international schools in Asia. We were very fortunate that we could count on that most students were going to have devices at home. But we did quickly learn that, yes, there may be a device at home, but you also might have families where they have 4 children at home and parents at home. And that's a lot of devices trying to be connected to the same routers. And so we can't fix those problems, but we could loan out devices to families that needed additional devices. And so that was important. Can you access the learning that's happening online? And then it was important to address those connectivity issues. Although we couldn't cater to what the connectivity looked like in their apartment, we could provide materials that parents could print. And it was interesting, parents in the younger years, they wanted to be able to print everything off at once. So they could do that during the weekend before their week started. And so it was important to learn from our parents, what can we do to support you, to support your child, and to facilitate that learning at home when they're not online with their teacher. And then in terms of the curriculum, when school was delayed for 2 weeks, there wasn't a lot of talk about what changes need to happen in the curriculum. For a month, not a lot of conversation about it. But once you go past a month, that's going to be really hard for a second language learner who's learning Chinese, who hasn't been having, doing the muscle memory as much, the writing in class, and hearing their teacher just throughout the day, whether it's on the playground or in the hallway, formal instruction in class. We knew that there was going to be a larger impact on our younger learners, socially, and as they're developing their literacy. And so conversation started to shift towards what learning really matters and how can we be less content driven and make sure we are supporting literacy and numeracy, but also social emotional learning and the well-being of students. I forgot part of the question, so if I need to loop back, just if you need, just redirect me.
No, that's that's so true that those, I think for so many people that we realized how much those informal interactions contributed to all those things that you just mentioned, not only right the learning, to the literacy and the numeracy, but also to those social and emotional connections that students have with their peers, with their teachers, and how all of that together contributes to a student's to their overall well-being and academic success. So I do want to back up and ask, I do want to ask you a little bit more. You said that you were listening to parents a lot more, or that you started to listen to parents more to reorganize some of the things that you were doing. I'm sure at the same time that you had to, then you had to come back to your teachers, right, and facilitate a change with them. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about how that dialogue between, I guess, parents, leadership, teachers, students, how all of that how that came together?
I'd say from pretty much the start of online learning, like once it was clear this was going past 2 weeks, we started sending out parent, teacher, and student surveys. So student surveys went out for upper primary and above. And then teachers were I think a little bit less frequent than parent surveys. But we stayed in really close contact with our parent group at the school, CISPTA. Had online meetings with them to get feedback. Also, the parents in the elementary school and the Hangzhou parents for our students we have a group of students in year 10 who go to our Hangzhou campus. And so those students clearly had to come back to Hong Kong or having a much different experience because they were back in Hong Kong. But those parents have WhatsApp groups, we had informal channels for getting feedback from parents and also the formal surveys. And quite simply, it was summarize and share the findings and make those findings visible to teachers. And so we were able to use those findings to have a conversation with our year level leaders. And that would be the first conversation. What do you see? What do you notice? What are changes we can make? And then they would take that back to teams, open up the conversation, and then changes would be made. And so this would have to happen quite quickly because you're not going to take a couple of weeks to shift. And so we were wanting to fail forward and not be afraid to make changes based on these insights from parents and from students. I'd say, okay, yes, after 3.5 months, we had to pivot a lot, and it does get trying for everybody involved. I would say because we kept the conversation focused on students, like what's best for students, not what's easiest for parents, not what's easiest for teachers, or yet it's another change. Do we really want to do another change? Is this change what's best for students? If it is, then yes, we're going to change. And so we were, I think, keeping the focus on students, I don't want to say that, I will say it. It's an overused phrase. Being student-centered did actually really help keep the focus on what really matters here. Yeah. It's our students, it's our kids. And if those parents are frustrated or those teachers are frustrated, yes, but we're adults and we have better coping mechanisms.
Mhm. Yeah, that's, you know, a lot of this has caused a lot of folks, I think, to not only to put a mirror up to some of their practices and really some of the terms that we use, right? Like student-centered or parent communication. This has really caused folks to say, okay, we've been saying we're student-centered, or we've been saying we listen to our school community and our parents. Here, like you had, like people put that into practice, and it sounds like CIS is really doing that and had to really sort of, I guess, come to grips that that those conceptions were insufficient previously, and been able to move right to encompass a lot more and really act those and live those often used terms. So that's fantastic. It sounds like one of the things that's interesting that struck me, what you just said, was, when you got the feedback from parents, that it sounds like you were using some practices, right, to then discuss that with faculty that previously existed. You didn't just tell the faculty, this is what parents are saying. You put it out in front of them and you ask them things. What do you notice, right? Some practices that might have existed previous to this transition. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what other sorts of existing capacities or dispositions or mindsets that you had at CIS that were able to contribute to success during remote learning?
So you have your sort of your logistics with your tech and curriculum, and that the human capital, having technology coaches, having instructional leaders, and just having additional people who could come in and join teachers' classes to do small breakout Zoom rooms, having teacher assistants. I feel like quite blessed to have, the human capital to support teaching and learning. But more than that, one of the dispositions that's always stood out for me at CIS was the collaboration. Mm-hmm. Because we have a dual language program, it's highly collaborative. We have part of our curriculum that's being co-taught in English and Chinese. That requires a lot of teachers bringing ideas to the table and then negotiating those ideas to come up with something that's new and that's going to work in both languages, in Putagua and in English. But more than that, what I started seeing was, so we've always valued the collaboration that we've had at school. I saw collaboration go to the next level. Mm-hmm. I felt that there were more conversations happening around, students' well-being and creating engaging curriculum experiences, creating projects in which students were able to connect with each other online. Beyond the classroom, what I saw across the school was the school really approached identifying ways in which they could share the stories of lives that were happening for our CIS community. They started with what's called Windows on Wuhan. So when the epidemic, when it was called an epidemic, and that had first started in February, the focus was very much on Wuhan. And so we had a series of videos that came out that showed the different ties the members of our community had with Wuhan, whether it was a favorite poet from Wuhan, like the noodle dish. Some of our teachers called Wuhan home. And there would be little stories shared and created and the communications team would create a video with the head of school or with a teacher or with a parent or a child, and it'd be shared out. And what I saw was that built a really nice, compassionate, caring connection to what was happening in Wuhan. It made it real. And because we have a strong Chinese identity, that was very important. The second, I think the second and third sort of video series that I feel like had a really important impact that really showed the mindset and the dispositions that are valued at CIS were the head of school interviewing students, interviewing them, their experiences with online learning, interviewing the student council, highlighting their experiences. There was a focus on a video series every week for like 7 weeks, a focus on well-being, and students would submit and families would submit photos and videos of what they were doing to create well-being in their lives. So it was sharing cooking recipes. Kids were showing, being videoed riding their bikes or going for a hike. And the kids loved watching these. And that's where that sense of community, and again, going back to being caring and compassionate for each other. I think that when we had to make so many changes from Google Meets to Zoom with the technical stuff, this is what the online learning plan looks like for parents. This is what it looks like this week. There was more compassion and care for and tolerance for those changes because we were getting to know each other as a community in a very different way. You were in people's homes every week. That's going to change relationships.
Yeah, and so it sounds like this has maybe amplified or magnified a part of what your school's purpose was before, and that was creating that compassionate, caring connections. What else have you seen in your school's purpose? What it means, what Chinese International School means to students, to its teachers, to its parents. How has that changed? How else has that changed because of the pandemic?
I think I think very similar to the language of 21st century learning. The school CIS has always wanted to have student choice and voice. I think we're living that a lot more closely now. It was clear, again, it was based on feedback to primary and secondary teachers. Kids wanted more choice. They wanted more different types of interactions. They wanted to work at their own pace. And so that flexibility, our mindsets we were untethered from our old practices as practitioners in the classroom, and we were able to more fully support students with performance-based assessments and projects that were connected to what's happening right now in our community. So a history unit was redefined as history through our eyes, reflecting the current COVID situation and bringing student voice into that. And they are living through a very big moment in history right now. And to be able to leverage that as a learning opportunity is huge. And I believe that a higher level of comfort was, once again, that those logistics were taken care of, like we know we're going to Zoom, then you can really start thinking about, well, we've always said we wanted, we've always wanted to be, have students have voice and choice and be project based. Now we can do that. We can untether ourselves more. I think so that silver lining, the silver linings have been that greater sense of community, an authentic sense of community, and really shifting the focus to more voice and choice for students.
I mean, you're talking about things that schools have been challenged to implement for more than a decade now. And yet Chinese International School took what is a very difficult situation and accelerated at those things. Instead of dialing it back on student voice and choice and performance-based assessments and making the learning more relevant and engaging, you turned it up. Right?
But the community was a big part of that. So for our primary school students, when our primary school students couldn't normally go out, I mean, field trips, you know, those experiential learning experiences are so important for kids of all ages. And for our learning, for our primary school students, that really adds a lot of context, especially for their social science unit. So when our kids were learning about rights and responsibilities and we're not able to go out and be in the community to learn about this, we really were able to tap in to our secondary students and parents who readily helped develop lessons about rights and responsibilities in collaboration with our teachers and presented and shared their knowledge with our kids. And it was so great to see secondary students sharing with primary students. And then as a result, the secondary students, as they're thinking of what they're going to do in their clubs for next year, thinking of ways to include the primary students next year. And I thought, this is what we've always wanted, a greater connection between the divisions. And the key now is, how do we make this sustainable? How do we keep the momentum going? It's been 4.5 months of online learning, and then on campus, then hybrid learning, and then summer program. Our schools will be returning in Asia in August. I'm not sure about schools around in other parts of the world. How do we make this sustainable? How do we hold on to these really good bits and make those part of our permanent practice?
Yeah, so you mentioned that this allowed your teachers to become untethered from some of their past practices. I'm sure that it was difficult for some folks to maybe let that go. What are some other things that you had to give yourself permission to do, right, during this time of remote learning, that unleashed some of these practices that you're talking about?
I think, we needed to give permission on how to do assessments differently. How to do benchmark assessments differently. And those traditional assessments that give us information across time that have been part of the school year, that wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen in the traditional sense. And so some of the practices, we needed to think about ways to assess students. I mean, you clearly need to know where students are with, especially with their reading levels or with their numeracy levels. So what are we need benchmarks in place. We need to know if there's growth or if there's not, so it can inform forward instruction or inform instruction forward. And so it was teachers and teams working with the curriculum coaches to plan differently around the assessments. And there was permission when teachers said, the way we're doing this is not going to work. I can't find a way, to tweak this assessment so we're getting the data that we usually have. Then fine, we won't do it that way. And you just, in that moment, you have to be confident that another way will work. And that happened just across the curriculum. It happened with, it's not only student learning, but it's also professional learning too for teachers. We had an idea in mind of what professional learning, typically looks like, but that also needed to change. And just because we were teaching a little differently online or in hybrid doesn't mean professional learning for teachers didn't change. So that was also delivered in a different way. And I think we can see this across the world through podcasts and webinars. There's probably more professional learning happening for teachers in the last couple of months than, than across an entire year. There's a hunger to learn right now and to do things differently that are going to work for students. So we gave permission, and it was in the moment we were willing to give that permission to let an old practice go.
And by doing so, you were able to, you describe all of these great different projects of, around well-being and photos and videos of well-being, and your head of school interviewing students and student council and sharing all of that. But through that, right, I'm hearing you're saying there were still some things that needed to stick, right? We still needed to know students are hitting certain benchmarks. Our professional learning can't stop, right? I guess what I'm hearing that the big goal at the end, or the things that we shoot for, right, remained in place, but gave some flexibility on how you were going to get there. Is that fair?
That's fair. Definitely.
Yeah,
flexibility is a good word.
Yeah, I think we're all I don't know, yoga masters or gymnastics or gymnasts now, right? So
flowing like the water in the river right now. Around the rocks, over the rocks. Right. We'll get by.
So Kelly, I want to ask you then, all the great stuff that's happened, all the learning that's happened for your students, for your faculty, for the school community, what are some of the things that you hope might stick when you go back to campus? Or when things resume in the fall, excuse me.
I think, so a couple of things. One is about the keeping technology and curriculum simple. Identify core tools and core learnings that really fit the context and the culture of our school. And that's going to look different for different schools depending on what their mission statement is. But whatever we're doing, when we look out for inspiration to bring it back to our own school, make sure we're fitting it within the context of our school. Adapting different practices from different schools blindly does not work. So I think it's being very deliberate about the enculturation of practices. I would say that we've absolutely learned that learning is not something that only happens in the four walls of a classroom. We've seen this around the world, and learning's intrinsic, and it can be found anywhere in our lives, around our families, in our communities. And students and parents and teachers have been thrust into a situation in which we're all part of a community of learners, and they have gained trust. I think students have gained a lot of trust in themselves, and as teachers, we've gained more trust in what our students are capable of. And there's just overall, maintaining that trust in the community, and that trust that although the learning may look a little different than I had envisioned it to, let's trust that students are thriving, and they're more than surviving in this situation. They're thriving in it, because we are showing that learning can fit into the context of their lives. So my two takeaways are making sure things fit into the context of our schools, and we continue to have trust in our communities. And through that trust, we're going to make the right choices for online learning and hybrid learning.
Beautifully said, Dr. Grogan. I'm not going to try to sum that up in any way. We are at the end of our time, I think, and the world, schools throughout Asia, schools throughout the world, I think, have a lot to learn from the experiences that you just shared at Chinese International School. And that's what this series of discussions is all about, is connecting good people at good schools doing good things, right? So that we can make the schools that our world and our children need and deserve. So thank you, Dr. Grogan. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Joseph.